Welcome to Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Delivery, your host, and my guest today is Barry Rutten. He is the co-founder and managing partner of Wealth Defense Financial Advisors. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Glad to be here, Paul. Only one quick correction. I do pronounce it as Rutten, but that's okay.
Rutten. And I knew that, but I was just testing you to see if you'd correct me, by the way.
To see if I knew, huh?
I apologize for that. I'm just, English was never one of my strong suits, by the way. That's why I have a math degree. I have trouble with diction and
see, and I just stayed away from the math classes and went with anything that had an essay exam. So different strokes, right?
Yeah. So obviously a financial planner, Barry, and it's a very interesting, it's something obviously as you get older, you start to think about retirement, right? And, how do we plan for the future, and how do you make sure that when you retire, you have enough money, not just from a personal level, but, all your assets are secured and all that. And you're a self-proclaimed contrarian. What does that mean?
Well, I just think, contrarian just means I think you're going against the grain, and I don't do it to be ornery or difficult or combative. I just think that a lot of the information that's put out there isn't necessarily helpful to people, but it may be helpful to the organizations that put the information out there. Everybody, if I said, how should you start your day with a good breakfast? Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but that whole campaign wasn't even put out by the cereal companies. It was put out by the milk lobby, because most people considered a good breakfast a bowl of cereal and you poured more milk on it.
Sure, exactly.
Or milk does a body good. Well, the truth of the matter is milk protein is acidic, and it actually leaches calcium from your bones to buffer the acid. So dairy isn't necessarily good for your bones, but it was a great marketing slogan. And I'm not trying to give nutritional advice here. I'm just trying to say things that we take as almost ingrained truth. If you don't know their source, you can often be going down a road that isn't necessarily beneficial to you, but could be beneficial to the organization that put it out there. And I can give you some examples if you'd like.
Yeah, no, we'll get into that in a minute. But you touch on a good point. In general, I don't trust anybody. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't, because everyone has an agenda,
right?
Everyone's pushing an agenda, and I know. I was reading your bio about all the talking heads on TV. Right. Of giving financial advice. I scratch my head because I don't trust any of them. Right.
Well, those folks, I call them financial entertainers. And I think it's a good example of how you don't necessarily want to take everything at face value. And I'm not saying walk around being mistrusting, but if you understand the motivation of the folks that are on, AM drive talk radio or a TV and such, they're financial entertainers. Their job, their purpose in life is to sell advertising.
Right.
The way they sell advertising, the way they keep you glued to the radio or the TV is by being controversial and by having a common enemy or enemies, things that they can rally or rail against. And so you have a person, a whole person with a life and a family and a history who gets screened by a producer for really one of two things. The producers are looking for someone that the host can either beat up a little bit, right? Like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this. Or fits one of their enemies list where the question or the topic can allow the host to rage against the machine. And all the people who like the host are like, yeah. And it just keeps you glued so that when the commercials air, you'll stick around.
Yeah.
They'll get good Nielsen ratings. And then, hey, and we're back. And they keep it going. And to give somebody financial advice with a 30-second, here's my whole world in 30 seconds and boom, here's this advice. The fact that people take that advice is stunning to me. And I'm not saying 100% of what they say is bad or wrong, but a lot of it is. But it just makes for good radio or TV.
So I'm going to take a flyer on this one. I'm assuming you've had clients that call you up and say, hey, I was listening to Kramer on, whatever. I don't even know what station he's on, but he said this. How do you react to that?
Well, my first reaction is like, why does that matter that, and I'm not going to name names because I don't have a big legal budget. So, but, I think we all know who these folks are. There's men, there's women, there's TV, there's radio. They're very well known. By the way, fantastic marketers. I give them all the credit in the world for, getting themselves out there and getting exposure, and they've made themselves wealthy doing that. The
Right.
question is, are they making you wealthy? And so, like I said, some of the advice is good advice. Get out of and stay out of debt is good advice. But just because someone comes on and says, I think this particular whatever stock is going to do great, how does that apply to you? How does that fit into a bigger picture?
Yeah.
What ends up happening is, if you jump around from the money magazines that say to do this, and the TV thing that says this, and Facebook says this, and your brother-in-law says this, you end up with what I call financial fragmentation. It's like a grenade that blows up and all the fragmented pieces go everywhere. You're just all scattered. Another way to think about it is, it's like your Frankenstein's monster. Your body, your financial body, has been cobbled together from all these pieces, and it isn't a pretty sight, and it actually makes it really hard to be successful. And so I would say that just because you're listening to someone or read someone, how does it fit into the picture? Does it get you where you're going? And just for the record, if there's a chunk of your money, I don't know, 10% of your money, 5% of your money, where you're like, you know what, I just want to have this account, and I don't want to chase every, get rich quick wild tip that I hear, at the bowling alley, go for it. I'm not saying not to do that. If that's exciting and fun and interesting, and but not with your serious money, not with your long-term, really is going to eventually the money that's going to replace your income, replace your labor. We need to approach that very differently. Yeah.
So that kind of leads me into the next segment is, what are some of the basic tenets that you believe in that you try to pass on to your clients? Things like, you mentioned one of them, having no debt, things like that, how to be financially responsible with your money, just day to day, along with investing. So what are the basic tenets that you kind of believe in and pass on to your clients?
I've been doing this for 35 years, and early on, I realized that almost all of the things we do financially fall into pretty much two categories, and it really hasn't changed very much.
Okay.
Category one is avoid financial loss. So wherever you are today, wherever you are, Paul, wherever I am, with any of your listeners are, you have your present financial position. And that was probably acquired through a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and work, and saving and investing and setting money aside. So you have savings, you have investments, you have equity in your home, you have retirement plans. The key is, in each of those things, we don't want to expose those things to loss. So that loss could be in the form of lawsuits, or you lose your job, or somebody dies, or somebody gets hurt or sick, or big market drops that at least on paper decimate your accounts. And so avoiding financial loss is the first game. So you have to kind of put a financial brick wall behind where you are.
Okay.
And my observation is, a lot of people have a wall. If you actually think about an old brick building, in a town, if you poke at the wall, there's going to be some loose bricks, even ones with some missing mortar, and just the slightest tap, that brick's going to fall through. Yeah. Now you've got a hole, and that's where the money kind of leaks or floods out, depending on the size of the hole. So first job, patch all the holes, reinforce all the mortar, make sure the defensive brick wall is really solid behind all of the different ways that we can be exposed to, potentially devastating financial loss that could set you back, decades. Once we've got that in place, then it's about achieving financial success. That's the other main silo. And success is going to mean different things to different people, but predominantly, people want to buy their first or second home. They want to start a business. They want to send their kids to college. They want to be able to not work if they don't want to at some point. They want to feel secure, right? I mean, most of us, if we're still working, work because we have to, not necessarily because we want to, even if you like what you do. And the goal of, in my mind, retirement came about. People didn't used to retire. You kind of worked till you died. Then the idea of a safety net, which was really Social Security, which came out of the Great Depression, people started to think, well, maybe I don't have to work till I die. And what was interesting is, back then, when they set up Social Security, life expectancy was like 67, 68, something like that. So, you retired at 65, you lived for 3 years, they sent you a few checks, you died. Thank you very much. Today, everybody's eating kale and doing CrossFit. They're living too long, right? And so you can have 30 years of additional life beyond this arbitrary retirement date. And most people don't know how to make that happen. And if they have spent their entire life accumulating, so if they have been in the accumulation mode, and I'll kind of go a little bit more specific on retirement here for a second.
Okay.
So the way I see it is the nature of retirement is like a mountain, and you have two sides. You have the climb up the mountain. That would be the retirement asset accumulation phase. You're trying to build up a big pile of money. The other side of the mountain is the retirement income distribution phase. They are radically different in how they're structured, what tools are used, how they're executed, and the risks faced in each area. And it's interesting because if you stay with that mountain analogy, and if you think about a mountain guide on Mount Everest, those guys do not necessarily really earn their money on the ascension, on the up. Because I'm not saying it's easy. I can't do it, but that's not where they earn their money. They earn their money on the way down because everybody's tired and oxygen deprived, and they've been up since 2 a.m. and it's cold and they're weary and it's getting dark. And that's when people start falling off the mountain and falling into crevasses and such. So if you ask any mountain guide, you say, where do you earn your money? It's on the descent.
Yeah.
And what I find is that people, even if they did pretty good on the accumulation side, the up the mountain side, they're using the wrong tools and the wrong strategies usually on the get down the mountain, get back home safely side. And they can end up actually decimating their retirement assets and essentially ruin their retirement. And you see stories of people going back and being a Walmart greeter.
Sure.
Because it didn't work out. And so I think what we have to do is, again, on the accumulation side, try and avoid that loss. And then on the distribution side, make sure that money lasts, keep pace with inflation, is secure, so that you don't have to go back to work and you don't have to worry, and you don't have to worry what Jim Cramer says.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are some of the things, again, we may not want to get in particulars today, but what are some of the things people can do? Like you said, we all get to retirement. We have this nest egg. You say, okay, I think I have enough. What are some of the things that you believe in that you try to teach your clients to do as when you're on the descent? That's a good way to put it, by the way. I like that analogy.
Yeah. Well, I think the one of the risks that people don't really pay much attention to, and I think it's probably a little bit of a financial planner geeky thing, but it's really, really important, is what's called sequence of returns risk. Of returns risk. So what that means is, again, when you're in that accumulation phase, you sort of come to accept, you might have up years, you might have down years. And the order in which those happen isn't all that important, as long as there's more ups than downs, right? So over any 10-year period, you've got about a 94% chance of having mostly up years and just a few down years. Okay. The problem is your date of retirement is somewhat arbitrary in relation to what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay. So you decide, I'm going to retire at 65 on this date. And the world, upon hearing of your, exit from the economy, suddenly, all gets, thrown into a tizzy. And so if you have even in just a few early years of really bad returns, and you're trying to take your income directly from those investments, what happens is you end up selling those investments to meet the income need, right? So if you need $5,000 a month and you were hoping this thing made, 8%, and you could live off that and maybe reinvest a chunk or whatever, in the years where it's zero or negative, you might actually have to sell some of that asset. Now you've taken some soldiers off the field, so to speak. They're not available to go back up when things go back up, and they forever are out of the picture for reducing income. That's extremely dangerous. And again, that's what I'm saying is people are using the tools of accumulation instead of the tools of distribution. And so what we want to do is we want to essentially have, I guess what I call a buffer tank strategy. What I mean by that is, let's say again, your expenses were $5,000 a month. I'd like to see 2 to 3 years of those expenses in cash or cash equivalents, higher yielding savings, laddered CDs, laddered bonds, multi-year guaranteed annuities, anything that short-term, safe, good rate of return. It's more about liquidity and safety.
And that's really kind of your working capital, kind of.
Right. And so then right. You're paying bills out of that account. Now, here's the key. I've got to replenish that account. I got to keep it topped off.
Sure.
So a lot of times we'll use a strategy where we'll use a chunk of money that will kick out cash flow to replenish that account. And let's say we set that up for 10 years. Now we've kind of gotten you from 65 to 75, and we've kind of gotten you out of that sort of danger zone, right? We've pushed you a little bit closer to life expectancy. And what we can often do is split your money up. So once we've funded that buffer account, we can split your money up and we can say, okay, let's use a chunk to generate replacement income. So that tank always stays full. I'm always drawing my monthly expenses from a safe place. It doesn't matter what the market's doing, up, down, sideways, not only in any one day, week, month, in any 1 year, 3, it doesn't matter, because I've changed my time horizon to 10 years.
Right.
I'm going to take that other part of the money, and let's just say we split it in half to make the math easy, okay? So let's say I took $500,000, and that $500,000 kicked out the amount of money I need to replenish my buffer tank, so over 10 years. And I send my other investment out into the future for 10 years. There's a rule of 72. It says if you take the rate of return and divide it into the years that you're working with, it'll tell you how long it'll take your money to double, right? So in this case, if I earn 7.2% over 10 years, I will return back to my original $1 million, right? My $1 million were split in half, 500 generated current income to replenish my account, 500,000 at 7.2% grows back to $1 million. Yep. I can now repeat that process again. Now, at the end of that second cycle, I'm going to be 85 years old. I'm not all that worried. I think I can structure things to, last the rest of my life. But we've gotten you out of that danger zone. Yeah. And literally for a decade at a time, you're not even looking at the statements you're getting in the mail because the structure is meant to be worry-free and kind of take a lot of the emotion out of this by lengthening the time frame that we're sitting on the money.
Yeah, no, that actually is a good strategy, I think, Barry. I'd not really heard that put in those terms before, but yeah, you have your safe money that if the market goes down, it's not really going to affect you.
Right.
So what about, I hear these terms thrown around, the 4% rule, the 3% rule, that if you take the idea of that is if you take 3 or 4% of your investments out every year, hopefully it'll replenish itself. If you can live off the 3-4%, depending on how much you have, right? Along with Social Security and whatever you have else going, you should never go broke. Well, what's your take on that one? Is it you believe in it?
Well, the 4% rule came from a white paper that a guy did. His name was on the tip of my tongue, but it escaped me. But it's a kind of a famous white paper in one of the financial planning journals. And he just looked historically, and he looked at rates of return and inflation and up years and down years, and he said if you started out with taking 4% and adjusted that for inflation and the problem is we've been in a long-term decline in bond rates. When he wrote that, bond rates were much higher.
Yeah.
Frankly, stock market volatility has increased, I think, as we've all experienced. And that 4% rule, if you look at the financial literature now, has been reduced to like 2.5.
Oh, wow.
Which is brutal because you think about the amount of capital you need. $1 million at 4% is $40,000. Now, if I go to 2.5%, how much capital do I need to have the same amount of income? It's a lot more. And so I've lived with the 4% rule for a large part of my career. And I'll be honest with you, it has always been in conflict with my thoughts about the role of money. I only think money should do one thing at a time. So the 4% rule is saying, hey, stay invested with this portfolio, whether it's 70-30, 80-20, 60-40, 50-50 stocks and bonds. And hopefully, hope and a prayer, it'll earn this fictitious 8% or whatever, which doesn't happen every single year, right? You're going to have up years, down years, negative years. And then hopefully there's this 4% or whatever available to draw. And hopefully the other piece is getting reinvested. And hopefully this is going to get bigger to keep pace with inflation. I've actually just decided I think that's crazy and really stressful for everybody, me included, as an advisor to clients, right?
Yeah.
So the strategy that I laid out for you before, I call it a split. So it's like a buffer and a split. And what it's doing is it's saying, look, each component has a job and it only needs to do one thing and one thing only. So I don't want to necessarily have my money have to produce income and grow simultaneously because that doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So I have my buffer tank with my cash and cash equivalents for my bills. There's really very rarely, or maybe even never had, more than a 3-year down market. Okay. So that's where the 3 years. So 2 years, 3 years. And don't worry about the rate of return on it. It's more like the return of your money than the return on your money. It's liquidity, it's safety. And then by saying, hey, we're going to replenish that tank with essentially a guaranteed income generating contract, so that for the next 10 years, you still know that buffer tank is always going to have 3 years of money in it. And at the end of 10 years, I've sent the remaining money out into the future. And all I've asked it to do is earn 7.2%. If I've got some bonds in there paying interest, I've got some dividend paying stocks, and the income side of that portfolio can earn 3%, I only need the stock side to do 4%,
right,
to hit my target. That's a much lower threshold. I'm not sitting there praying for a 25% return to rescue me from the negative 15% that I had last year. And so, again, perfect example. That was a very scholarly article that came up with the 4% rule, and everybody followed it. And that's the way to do it. And 4%. Well, hey, maybe you should step back and not necessarily just mindlessly follow that.
Sure.
Maybe you can come up with a strategy to take some of this stuff off the table and stop worrying about all these things. And that's kind of what that strategy I laid out for you would do.
No, I actually like that, Barry. That's why you're a contrarian, right? That's why you're not just following, standard stuff. So, well, let's talk about, estates and all that other stuff. What are some of the recommended? Because we all hear the stories of parents dying, and it's a mess. Mm-hmm. Right. And then lawyers get involved and all this other stuff. So what should people do to protect their things for the next generation?
I'll tell you 2 to 3 soapbox kind of things, meaning these are things I really get amped up about. Soapbox number 1, if you have children, minor children, you have to have a will with guardianship provisions in the will.
Okay.
And within that framework, you really want to have a structure that both addresses the care of the person, a guardian of the person, if you will. And that could be Sister Sally, who's an awesome mom.
Right.
And, It's basically Aunt Sally, and they trust and love, and the kids all get along. That's great. But it's possible that Sally's family may not be the best money managers in the world. And so you might want to have, Brother Paul, who's a CPA, or you maybe want to designate a professional fiduciary,
sure,
or trust, bank to be the manager of the money, who has a legal obligation to follow the instructions in the trust. So how it would work is you have a will. It has what's called a testamentary trust, which means it doesn't come into existence until you die. And you have the guardianship provisions, and you have your executor of your estate. And so what happens is a certain amount of assets go into this trust that was established in your will, that comes into being. The trust, the executor actually creates the trust, has its own tax ID and all that. And now there's funds professionally managed, made available to the guardian to take care of your children. So that's soapbox 1. Please, if you have children, take the time. I actually have a platform that's actually pretty cool. I'm not a lawyer, but I have a platform through a firm that I use that makes this very easy and very reasonable in cost. So if anybody's listening, reach out. We'll give you some contact information here at the end. But it's just the idea of children becoming orphans. There's mom and dad on date night at the movies, coming home, boom, truck hits them, they're gone. What is the babysitter going to raise the kids?
Yeah.
And what if there's a fight between Sister Sally and Grandma, who both think they're equally qualified to be in charge? So we're trying to eliminate those kind of family squabbles. We're trying to make sure the funds are available to take care of the kids. So that brings me to soapbox issue number 2.
Let's hear it.
Life insurance death beneficiaries named as minor children. So mom and dad are married. Dad's primary beneficiary, of course, should be mom. But what I'll see is, if mom's not around, we want to make sure the money goes to the kids. So we'll leave it to Bobby and Sally, who are 3 and 7. This is a technically incorrect thing to do. The reason is insurance companies are not going to write a check for $500,000 or $1 million to Sally. She's going to spend it all on Barbie's dream house stuff. It's just not going to be prudent, right? But honestly, she can't open a bank account. She can't do all that stuff. And what's going to happen is somebody's going to have to petition a court to gain access to the funds for the care of that child. And that could take a long time and a lot of lawyer fees and such. And what you intended isn't going to happen. So what's the solution? 2 steps. Step 1, if you have it now, if you have life insurance now, if you don't, you should have it. But if you don't, we're going to make the contingent beneficiary something called a UTMA, Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. It's sort of a universal statute that all those states have adopted. that allows you to name a custodian for the client, for the child's funds. So the beneficiary designation, this is going to be a little long. There's ways to abbreviate it, but it would sound like this. Robert Smith, son of the insured, with Susan Jones, sister of the insured, as custodian under the Washington Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. What happens at that second death is the life insurance company writes a check to that account. So basically the custodian opens a bank account, or the insurance company gives you a checkbook registered like that, highly abbreviated. But what it clearly says to the world is, I'm an adult. I've been designated as the custodian for these funds. I will administer these funds for the benefit of the minor. Now, remember, I started out with Robert Jones, or whatever I said, son of the insured. The child actually owns the money, but it can only receive it in terms of the capital when they're an adult.
Right.
Usually 21. Some states allow you to extend it to 25. So that's phase one. Phase two would be put that in place. That's pretty easy to change. Phase two would be to do the estate planning that I talked about in the first soapbox moment, which was get the will, get the testamentary trust established, figure out who the guardians are going to be, and do that. So it's kind of a two-phase kind of thing. The third thing that I feel that parents miss the opportunity to do is give their children good financial education. Money is always in the dark for everybody. Kids are unaware of, money in, money out, bills, monthly bills, quarterly bills, annual bills, taxes, credit cards. When the children are age appropriate, and there are really, really good, people have come out with some great online, in most cases free, financial education that's age appropriate. And you can even actually have this kind of curriculum in a school. Where the teacher can actually have a curriculum to follow that's grade appropriate. And teach the kids, basic piggy bank stuff all the way up to, high school level, where you can pretty much talk to them about anything. It is painful for me to see how many clients that I deal with that wasted, for example, decades of compounding that if they had been setting some money aside, got so buried in debt, overbought their house, too many car loans. So they had all this money passing through their fingers, but it all went to other people. And so they really have wasted a lot of time, and then now they're scrambling to make up for that time. And so financial education for children, I think, is essential, age appropriate, but make it part of, and I think it's part of raising responsible adults. You want the best for them. Why leave them in the dark? They're not going to learn it at school. They're not even going to learn it in college.
It's funny, you've been hearing a big push lately. Some states are trying to require some financial classes for kids. It makes sense, because we've all learned the hard way, right? It's
stunning to me that, the home ec class is about like baking. It's not about actually economics. Right. And I think some schools may be, moving. I think there's a trend. I think it's moving that direction. But kids can understand stuff pretty early, and again, if it's age appropriate. So I think those three things, and as far as that sort of wasted multiple decades, as you know, Paul, small sums of money compounded over long periods of time produce vast sums of money. That's the one lesson. I'll be honest, I'm not a financial expert.
That's the one lesson I'm trying to teach my kids. Save early, save often. And, you got, like I said, if money doubles every 7 to 10 years, you don't have to be a nuclear physicist to figure out how much you have in the end, So,
Albert Einstein said compound interest was the eighth wonder of the world. He's a pretty sharp dude. So what we try to do is help parents start what I call early wealth building plans. If it's $50 a month, if it's $100 a month, it doesn't matter.
Something.
As long as the clock is ticking and money is compounding. Waiting till you're 25 to your first major real job, or 30 or something, and then all of a sudden you start saving. 3 decades of compounding lost.
Right.
There's a famous example where you have two people, one waits till they're 30 and does nothing. One starts putting a couple $1,000s away and then stops after like 10 or 15 years. And when they get out to 65, they both have the same amount of money, but the person who waited had to put in vastly greater contributions to make up for the lost
I've seen that. I've seen that comparison too. There's several of those floating around, but it makes sense. And again, I have a math degree and took some finance classes. That's the one thing I do understand is the power of compound interest.
I don't know if this shows up on camera with the background, but this is a HP 12C financial function calculator, and the main use of it is to do what are called future value calculations, putting in a lump sum or a monthly amount and an interest rate, a number of years of compounding, and what is the future value going to be?
Yeah.
And it's amazing what just 5 years difference will do to the ending value. So, again, that's kind of soapbox 3 is please get your kids started on compounding over long periods of time. Don't wait.
Yeah, I think people dismiss, it's only $50 a month, it's $100 a month. What's that going to get me? But they don't realize if you do that for 40 years, there's plenty of millionaires out there that never made more than $70,000-$80,000 a year.
Right.
Because they were disciplined in their saving. They saved early, they spent within their means. That's another problem, I think, Barry, is I see, like you say, money slipping through people's hands. How many people do you know that, they make 100, they live to 100. They make 500. They live to 500. They start buying boats and houses, and they're just turning an old dollar over for a new dollar.
I've met people who have multiple 6-figure household incomes, meaning 2 substantial 6-figure incomes, don't have 3 months worth of savings.
Yeah,
it's just really kind of startling, and some of it is societal, right? Our society is set up that it's only this much a month, and then it's the fancier car and I live in a reasonably affluent area, and you cannot believe how many literally Maseratis, Lamborghinis, $110,000 Porsche SUVs are out here. Now, if they can, I'm not telling you don't spend your money. You spend it any way you want.
Right.
But the cost of that capital going into essentially a depreciating asset versus what that capital could do for you in terms of generating income. And so that's the other big, I think, financial blind spot for a lot of people is the term called opportunity cost. I'm sure you got this in finance class, right?
Absolutely.
$1 spent on a pair of sneakers, an Apple Watch, a car, or whatever, is gone forever. $1 retained is there to produce income forever. And again, I'm not saying don't spend any money, but I think when you got to
live your life, right?
You got to bring in $1. I think you should spend a chunk. I think you should save a chunk, and I think you should invest a chunk. The purpose of work, the purpose of labor, if now we're going to live long enough to enjoy it, is to build up enough assets such that those assets produce enough income to replace your labor. So the money's working for you, the assets are working for you, so you're not doing the work. If you don't, you will continue to have to work to eat, to live. And so, building up income producing assets should be really the objective, because retirement is not about rate of return. That's the other falsehood. Retirement isn't, oh, my portfolio made X. I'm so tired of hearing that. I'm like, I don't care. What I care is, do you have sufficient cash flow? Retirement's about cash flow to cover your expenses, both your wants and your needs. And again, keeping pace with inflation, which right now is a little bit tougher.
Yeah, we're in a tough time right now. I think
I feel very bad. People on fixed incomes are really, 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 really suffering right now.
Yeah,
because I don't think anybody buys this even 9% inflation. When I go to the store and I see a carton of orange juice that used to be 64 ounces, half gallon, and last year or the year before, I can't remember the last time I looked, it was 58 ounces. And now I looked the other day, it was 52 ounces.
Yeah.
So they took 12 ounces out of the carton, but it kind of still looks like a half gallon on the shelf. It's the same price, but it's 20% less volume. So across millions and millions of cartons of orange juice, the orange juice company is doing good because they're getting the same amount of money for a lot less product. I call that shrinkflation. There's not just and if you talk to any food company, they are very public about it. They say people don't like to see the prices on the shelf go up, so we try and control that. And the only way to do that is to reduce what's in the package. So the half gallon of ice cream is now 1.5 quarts, right? And you just look at everything in the store. The box of cereal.
I'm gonna have to look at that because now you got me thinking about that.
If you look in the store, almost everything is significantly smaller in volume than it was before.
That's probably good. We need to be eating less anyway, Barry.
That's good. Thank you, Shrinkflation, for
Yeah.
reducing the size of my packages of stuff. So lose some weight.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think like right now we're in a bad time financially. The stock market's has not been doing great. And like you said, if you're on a fixed income, but I like your strategy. If you keep that 3 years of expenses in an account, you can survive the fluctuations in the market on the other side. So that's good advice. So, well, we'll pivot to one more topic, Barry. Business relationships, partnerships, all those types of things. You know, we see it on the news. We see it all. You know, people we know have partners, and things go south. You know, how do you set up a situation where they can protect each other? Say one goes through a divorce, or you know, I'll let you make some of these examples.
Sure.
One partner dies, his wife takes over, and everyone wants to sell. What do you do? How do you protect yourself in those situations?
You know, I have a soft spot in my heart for entrepreneurs. It's not easy to create something from scratch and you know, generate your own money as opposed to getting a check. I'm not dissing people who would take a check, but it is hard to create something from scratch and build a business. And a lot of times people do it with partners for various reasons. And, you know, when we start out, everything's all rosy and hunky-dory and we're all going to ride off into the sunset together. But, you know, there's 5 or 6 things that can happen that would cause a change in that situation. So you have the easy ones. There's death, there's disability, there's bankruptcy, there's divorce, there's I just want to get out.
Right.
I just want to get on my own because I want to go find myself in Tibet, or I don't like you anymore and I just want to get out. So it's kind of 2 versions of that. What many businesses don't have is a succession plan if they want to hold the business and pass it on, say, the next generation, and they don't have a business continuation plan if any of those events should occur. The solution to all that, or at least the starting point of that, is what's called a buy-sell agreement. And a buy-sell agreement establishes both a formula for how the business is valued, because there's a bunch of different formulas based on the kind of business, meaning a dental practice is different than a manufacturing company.
Right.
And it establishes a methodology for valuing the business and a frequency so that if somebody did need to sell, we're not first starting to figure out how that works. And then paired to that is what's called a business valuation. It's a professional accounting based on your business and your industry and the way your business runs and what it makes. What is it worth if it was sold today? And a lot of business owners, unfortunately, walk around in a delusional state of what their business is actually worth in the real world if they went to sell it. So on one hand, it's like, someday I'll give it to Junior, and there's no real plan or strategy for that, and that doesn't work well. Or hey, if something happens, like if you die, and your spouse's partner, your partner's spouse, they don't know how to run the business. You don't want to be in partnership with them, but how do you extract half the business's value and give it to that other person? And would that be devastating to the business? Well, of course it would, or it would cause a forced sale of the business. And so what we put in place are various financial tools that allow for addressing death, disability, retirement, bankruptcy, disputes, all those kinds of things. So this whole agreement's all spelled out in advance, so nobody's surprised, and you can essentially cash out the other person, or know the mechanism of how the business is going to be sold. Like you could give a first right of refusal to a competitor. Like if you're a dentist, I really like dentist Joe across the street. Yeah, we're competitors, but I wouldn't mind my patients going to him if I couldn't work with them, and so he might have a first right of refusal to buy your practice. But having these things in place in advance is essential. I really do worry about the family disputes that arise from these things, or the fact that this business is going to go out of business because it has to be sold just to kind of satisfy the estate settlement. And so it's kind of a big blind spot for a lot of businesses.
I think so. Yeah, having a plan, right? That's the name of the game.
Yep. Let the plan manage, everything. I have always believed in the plan, but I don't believe in the static plan. What we established today, things are going to change. And so it just needs to be monitored and checked in on. And it's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's just necessary. It's sort of the adulting part of all of this.
Yeah. And, if you don't have I've seen it in my life, my personal life, if you don't leave a plan when you pass, it just leaves a mess for the next generation. I've seen it firsthand. So
even with regular, families, kind of going back to not leaving a mess. I believe most people who have a family, who have especially some assets, including a house, should have what's called a living trust package. And that package will be the living trust itself, which places all of your assets, or most of them, into a structure where you're trustee. So while you're alive,
yep,
you're your own trustee. When you pass away, usually your spouse is your trustee. When both of you are gone, there's a successor trustee. It gives them the ability to do things like sell a home without having to go to court, which is the probate process, because there's a lack of a signature to transfer things like real property, like houses and cars and things. So it cleans up that mess. First of all, it keeps it private. Probate is public information, public record. So it keeps everything private. It establishes which people you trust enough to be the responsible parties, to be your executor of your will, the trustee of your trust. But along with that comes some really important other legal documents. So there'll be a general power of attorney, right? So if you slip and fall and hit your head on the ice and you're incapacitated for 6 months, you're in a coma, somebody can step in and do everything from pay your bills to, make arrangements and things.
Yeah.
There's a healthcare power of attorney, which is the care of your body, right? Finances and body are two different things, just like with the kids and the guardianship, to make medical decisions on your behalf for your care, including if you don't live, what happens to you after, what kind of extraordinary measures or none, or you be cremated or buried or sprinkled in the ocean or whatever. And then there's that living will is part of that, which is, again, what would the what would you want in terms of extraordinary care and feeding and breathing and all that kind of stuff. Kind of not fun, but my God, the burden placed on family without these tools in place, and the fact that people literally do not have the power to act on your behalf, and everything's kind of frozen. Your money and this and that is all frozen and inactionable. Makes a terrible nightmare. And then the last piece of that is what's called a pour over will. It's just all of your other stuff that doesn't pass through the trust directly, gets kind of dumped into the trust. It just makes sure everything's scooped up. And if you have some specific bequests, like, I want my daughter to get the grandfather clock, and I want my son to get my collection of watches, whatever, you can specifically make requests. Estate planning does not mean that the second you have the documents notarized, you're going to die. It just means you want to have a plan so that if you do, and when you do, it's there. So I would really encourage people. Again, we work for some national scale firms who've made this process very streamlined, very online, very easy, very reasonable.
You see all the advertisements on TV. It looks like it's a pretty simple process these days.
It's not hard. All you want to do is, in my opinion, avoid the do-it-yourself. You really do want a lawyer involved, because people have special situations often that aren't usually covered by what I call the boilerplate stuff. And I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a special needs child, there are things you want to do to make sure that their government benefits are protected and they're cared for. You may have a child that you want to disinherit for whatever reason. You have to specifically say that.
Yeah.
I'm actually working with a client right now who has 2 children, and they're adamant that, person 1, child 1 is out, but you have to specifically say that so that it can't be challenged, right? You have to have state-specific language to say that. And so I think that everybody's really busy doing the business of life, whether that's personal life, business life, work life. And so having somebody kind of take a comprehensive look at your savings and protection program, kind of on the defensive side, making sure you have a good income replacement plan if that gets interrupted. You're working on your goals, and you're minimizing taxes, and you're making sure your legacy is properly set up. That's what we do. And it's customized to each person. Some people have more complexity, some have less. Some areas are more important or more urgent. That's why it's usually a sort of a living, breathing thing that evolves over time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we'll end on that note, Barry. But before we end, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do it? I think you've come out. Today was a lot of great information, but I'm assuming there's people out there that are saying, "I'm not doing any of that stuff, so I need some help." So how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. They can just go to the website, wealthdefensegroup.com, wealthdefensegroup.com. For our business owner friends, if you did a /Bob, so wealthdefensegroup.com /Bobs, BOBS, like the guy's name with an S at the end. It's a little survey, self-survey you can take about what we call business owner blind spots. That's the Bobs.
That's the Bobs. Okay.
It kind of dives a little deeper into that topic that we were talking about, and happy to consult on that. That's definitely not a do-it-yourself topic. And on our website, there's a whole bunch of areas of planning. You won't see products or any pitches or anything. You'll just see a form on there where you can actually say, I'm interested in these various levels of planning. There's a box where you can put in some notes, what you're interested in. And it always just starts with a conversation.
Yep.
And if we're a fit, awesome. If we're not, I'll try and point you to resources of people who are a better fit. I just would like people to just do better for themselves, and not necessarily have to sit there in traffic listening to AM radio trying to figure out if this advice pertains to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's sound advice, Barry.
Cool.
Great. Well, hey, appreciate you coming on. I've enjoyed this. I've been wanting, it's funny, I've been wanting to have a financial planner, wealth management, like someone like yourself on for a while, and you're the first one.
Wow, I feel privileged. Thank you, Paul.
All right. Well, hey, again, thanks for being on, Barry. And that's a wrap for Business Brains and the Bottom Line.